There is a misconception that your money is sitting in a vault somewhere with your name on it, insulated from the chaos of the world. But a war breaking out 5,000 miles away can flip a switch in your bank's compliance department, and suddenly your debit card gets declined for no apparent reason. Today, we need to talk about why your bank account is not a storage unit. It is a permission slip, and that permission can be revoked without you ever doing anything wrong. Let's start in the summer of 1990. Iraq invades Kuwait, and the United States reacts by doing something that, at the time, felt like a financial nuclear option. They froze all Iraqi assets held in American banks. Now, if you were a civilian in Baghdad in 1990, you probably didn't have a lot of money in Citibank. But that action set a precedent. It told the world that the global financial system, specifically the dollar system, was now a weapon. Fast forward to today. In the first week of March 2026, reports emerged that the UAE was considering freezing billions of dollars in Iranian assets. This isn't just about Iran. It's about a mechanism that has quietly turned your local bank branch into an outpost of the Treasury Department. When a conflict escalates, whether in the Middle East or Eastern Europe, it triggers a chain reaction that runs through the Office of Foreign Assets Control, or OFAC. This is the agency that essentially writes the list of people and entities you are not allowed to do business with. Here is the part most people miss. We tend to think of sanctions as government-to-government pressure, but the actual enforcement doesn't happen at the border. It happens on your banking app. Banks like Deutsche Bank or JP Morgan are required by law to screen every single transaction against OFAC's specially designated nationals list in real time. If a war escalates, OFAC updates the list. Sometimes they add a massive state-owned bank in a conflict zone. Other times they add shell companies, frontmen, or opaque holding companies registered in places like Dubai or Luxembourg. Now, here's where the structural mechanics get interesting. Banks are terrified. If they accidentally process a transaction for someone on that list, even by mistake, they face fines that can run into the hundreds of millions of dollars. Because of this, banks have adopted something called the 50% rule. If a person on the sanctions list owns 50% or more of a company, even if that company isn't listed, that company is considered blocked by extension. So, a war breaks out. The government adds a name. The bank's algorithm scans for that name and any related entity. And here is where the freeze trickles down to you. Let's say you run a small importing business. You buy textiles from a supplier in Turkey. That supplier buys raw materials from a distributor in Russia who just got sanctioned. Your transaction technically is clean, but the bank's algorithm sees funds moving toward a high-risk corridor. They don't know if you're funding a war machine. They just know the risk is too high, so they pause the transaction. They might freeze the account while they investigate, and you're left standing at the counter, wondering why your money isn't moving. This is the overlooked mechanism, compliance de-risking. Banks are increasingly deciding that certain nationalities, certain ethnic-sounding names, or certain industries are just too difficult to deal with. They don't want the paperwork. They don't want the 10-year record-keeping requirement. So they close the account. They freeze the asset. Not because you did something wrong, but because the bank's compliance cost is higher than your account value. This brings us to the structural advantage. Who benefits from this? Think about the architecture of the system. The dollar is the world's reserve currency. Most international transactions touch the U.S. financial system at some point. This gives the United States and its allies what experts call extraterritorial jurisdiction. They can police transactions that never touch American soil simply because the transaction is denominated in dollars. When the UAE threatens to freeze Iranian shadow banking networks, they are using a tool that was sharpened after 9/11 and perfected during the 2008 financial crisis. It's called financial warfare. It's cheaper than dropping bombs. It targets the money, not the soldiers. And it relies on private actors, your bank, to do the targeting for them. The advantage lies in the centralization of data. When a war breaks out, the response is immediate. Capital flight from the conflict zone is halted instantly because the banks in New York, London, and Frankfurt hit the switch. The system is designed to protect itself. but in doing so, it creates a dragnet. Now, the personal implication. This isn't just about oligarchs or warlords. In 2022, when sanctions were imposed on Russia, the definition of a sanctioned Russian expanded. In the EU, for example, a sanctioned Russian was defined as any Russian national who was not also an EU citizen or resident. This caught people who had left Russia as toddlers, who had lived in the West for decades, who had never even been back. Their accounts were frozen. Their trusts were unwound. They couldn't pay their lawyers or their taxes. The same logic could apply to any conflict zone. If tensions escalate in the South China Sea, what happens to the assets of anyone with ties to that region? If a conflict erupts in Venezuela, and you happen to own oil stocks that touch that supply chain, your brokerage might restrict your ability to sell. Here is the uncomfortable truth. Your money is only yours as long as the geopolitical winds are calm. The moment there is a national emergency, your access to that money becomes secondary to the state's interest in applying pressure. This is where the reframe comes in. We are taught that savings are safe, that the bank is a fortress, but a fortress has gates, and the gates are controlled by compliance algorithms that are responding to wars you aren't even watching on the news. The system is not broken. It is working exactly as designed. It is a pressure valve, and sometimes when the pressure gets too high 5,000 miles away, the valve closes on your end. The tension you should sit with is this. You are now a participant in a global financial war. You didn't enlist. You might not even support it. But by holding dollars, by using these banks, your economic existence is part of the battlefield. The question is not whether the system can freeze your account. It can. The question is whether you understand the switch that flips it. If you want to understand how to navigate a world where money moves at the speed of geopolitics, hit subscribe. We're just getting started.